the long-awaited COVID-19 response from the Congress. Finally, we have a resolution, we have a package that is going to cater to a lot of the needs that have been impacted by COVID-19. It is a $900 billion package that they have come up with. My question to you is, do you think it's enough for the entire country? And do you think the way they've allocated these funds is also right?
No, it's not enough. It's obviously not going to be enough, but it's the only way they could push through something in a bipartisan manner. As you know, there was a bipartisan group of senators that worked on this and came up with a compromise package. And that's basically what this is, a compromise package. Most important, the key figure over which they had this big stumbling block and remains, that stumbling block remains, is funding for the states, for the individual states. I mean, states are in dire, precarious financial condition. And the states had asked for federal assistance. And I think I explained it to you in the last segment, where the federal government is the only one that can come forth with mammoth amounts of money in a crisis situation like we have and find ourselves in now. So that has not happened. What they've done is put together a patchwork deal for the moment to rescue the average worker out there whose unemployment benefits, the federal unemployment benefits, will run out the day after Christmas. And so they want to put some money in the pockets of those people. The stimulus checks are half the amount they were previously, but it's something, which is better than nothing, as the saying goes. The Republicans were resistant to giving out the same amount of money that they had earlier, which was $1,200 an individual and $2,400 for a couple, and then more for each dependent in the family. Now you've got $600 per individual earning up to $75,000. And $1,200 for a couple earning up to $150,000 total, and then $600 each for dependent children in the household under the age of 18. So that should help tide over at least a couple of weeks, I think. Airlines got some kind of a deal through this package. Some people in the hospitality industry, but not the entire thing. There was no major rescue for restaurants, I believe, in this package, which is a major problem. The restaurants are the ones suffering the most in this economy. And so basically it's just a patchwork of stuff to keep it going for the time. It's a Band-Aid approach, if you will. Basically, I think it's a Band-Aid approach. I think as soon as the Biden administration is sworn in, the then President Biden will probably want to have another stimulus deal passed through Congress, which is going to be very tough. The Republicans have already made it very clear that they're not really agreeable to such measures, and I'm sure that they don't want to make the Democratic president look too good, although he can reach out across the aisle.
Do you think the funding for schools is enough in this?
No, it's not going to be enough for that either. It's going to require a lot more. Don't forget that Congress, when they passed the bill earlier in May, the second CARES Act, which this effectively is now, they had allocated $2.2 trillion, $2.2 trillion. So that's a lot of money, and this is $900 billion, so it's under $1 trillion, right? It's short of $100 million to become $1 trillion, and it's just $900 billion, so it's definitely not going to be enough. This pandemic, people think, are hoping it'll end very soon next year. It's not. We're going to be stuck with it for a while. We have vaccines in the pipeline.
Right.
I know you'll be discussing this further with other guests and even maybe with me. A lot of that is happening, but this pandemic and its consequences, financial consequences, are going to be with us for a couple of years down the road.
So do you think we will need a system of stimulus checks for, say, the next year?
I'd say so, yes. I think there'd have to be more stimulus for the rest of the year, next year, in my opinion. I'm not claiming to be a major economic expert by any means, but it's basically common sense. There are a lot of people who are not going to get back those jobs. A lot of them have been lost permanently. I've been hearing as we speak now that probably over 800,000 more people have filed for unemployment again.
Right.
And we don't yet have a confirmation of that, but the situation is getting very bad. Those are first-time unemployment applications, by the way, which means the economy is teetering on the brink of not collapse, but destabilization. And so we do need enormous fiscal stimulus to stabilize the economy for the near term and for the longer term. This next year is going to be very difficult. It's not going to be easy.
Right.
I'm optimistic the vaccines will begin to work, but it takes time to develop that herd immunity. And then it's not just the United States, it's going to be the rest of the world. So there is a ripple effect of the economy globally, which then helps us, which in turn helps others around the world, and in turn makes us a happy global economic family. It's going to take time, and I think stimulus is going to have to be done here.
Right.
It's going to have to be done in Europe. It's going to have to be done in Asia, and down under in Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, in the African continent.
Definitely. You were just mentioning vaccines, so I would like to ask you some questions on that. The vaccine rollout has started, which is so exciting, and finally there could be an end to this nightmare of COVID-19. There has been an issue about politicians versus healthcare workers getting this vaccine. How have you looked at that? Do you think politicians or people in the Congress should be getting this vaccine ahead of other individuals in the country? And also, how have you looked at the healthcare workers getting the vaccine first?
Okay, I don't think members of Congress should be first in line unless they are within that category that has been specified by the health authorities, namely those who are frontline workers, those who are health people, those who are right there on the battle lines. Up front, the emergency workers, emergency room physicians, nurses, etc., who are dealing with COVID patients every single day, and in many cases every single minute of several days in a stretch. So those are the people who should be getting it first. Health workers, I think, definitely should be getting it first because they're the ones exposing themselves. I don't think the ones who are not dealing with this every single day. There are many healthcare workers out there who have opted not to deal with COVID patients. They don't need to get it right away. But there should be this priority of healthcare workers, frontline workers, I believe delivery people, truckers, grocery store workers, etc. Then, of course, seniors going by age. I believe the next tier will be those who are 75 and older, right, and those with underlying conditions besides the ongoing healthcare and frontline workers. Then tier 3 will be 65 plus. That's a good system to follow. Politicians, it was a good example set by Speaker Nancy Pelosi, by Joe Biden, the president-elect, etc., to go out there, take the vaccine. Anthony Fauci going publicly and taking the Moderna vaccine. These are necessary measures to instill public confidence. I myself, I don't mind admitting it, have always been very wary of vaccines myself. The flu vaccine, for instance. The reason I've been wary is because the couple of times my own physician, I'm giving a personal story, my own physician had recommended it. The couple of times he did, I took it, but both those times I ended up getting sick during the year that I took it. Not to say it was the vaccine's fault or anything like that, but coincidentally I happened to get sick. So I myself have been reticent about getting something like the flu vaccine. There are many people, thousands out there. However, when it comes to the COVID vaccine, I'm going to be in line when my turn is announced. I am going to go there and take it. I think it's extremely important because this is an illness, a pandemic, the likes we have never seen in our lifetimes, and we probably will not. And several generations of those coming after us will not. So it is a once in a lifetime, once in a century event, maybe once in a couple of centuries event.
Right.
And I think it's absolutely important if it is safe and it's been determined to be efficacious, as they say it is, then I think we should all go and take it.
However, President Trump has yet to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. We haven't heard much from his office either. How important do you think it is for him to take the vaccine, or do you think that will go against his supporters?
I think on that, I have a feeling that he hasn't come out publicly about this, but I'm giving you my theory. I think because he's already had COVID, he probably thinks he's built up enough antibodies. His immunity is good, and I think he doesn't see it as an urgent necessity that he go out there and take the vaccine, whether publicly or privately. He and his family, his immediate family, Melania Trump, his son, they've already had it, and I don't think he feels it necessary. It obviously is a great example if the president of the United States steps forward, and especially him with his base, with a base that has always been resistant to masks and to vaccines for that matter. I think if he did step forward, step up to the plate and do it, it would set a great example. So I'm not sure how else to read it, but my theory is that in his case, he's probably figuring out, look, I've had it. There's no urgency, so why should I rush out there and take it? And it's as simple as that.
Do you think that the vaccine will become a political issue? There has been obviously a take on wearing a mask and a take on not wearing a mask. And we've seen this throughout the year. Do you see the vaccine also becoming something similar to that?
It already is. It is a political issue. There are people, like I said, who do not believe in the vaccination process at all. Even for things like the measles, chickenpox, and all the rest of it, vaccines available for childhood inoculation. There are communities, entire communities throughout the country that refuse to take it, and you end up seeing many kids with these other illnesses suffering, the consequences of it. Right. So there is a resistance to vaccines for decades. Actually, it's not something new. I gave my own example about the flu, but I think this year it's a bit late, but I'm supposed to go and get the flu vaccine as well, and should do it. So I think yes, it's gonna be political. We live in a very political era now, and everything that can be political will become political.
Yes, for sure. Just talking about politics, I have more questions here. Again, my question to you, as always, President Trump has still not conceded. It seems like he will not until January 20th. It's not going to happen. And he continues his legal battles in states even now. January 3rd, the Congress would be sworn in. January 6th, these electoral votes which were counted would be counted in the Congress to basically affirm a Biden victory. Could you explain us a little bit more about this process and your comments on President Trump as well?
It's basically a certification process. The Electoral College votes will be presented before the House of Representatives. Congress then certifies it, saying yes, the Electoral College votes are legit. And essentially, they have determined that the next president of the United States is Joe Biden. And normally it's just a very mundane process, a very normal process where it's just a matter of saying, yeah, it's good. See you next year, or see you after 4 years, now the next election. So that's what really it is. The president is seeking to go to Congress and have them actually revolt, at least the Republicans to revolt and say, no, we don't accept the results. We don't accept the Electoral College verification of the election as having been won by Joe Biden. So he'd like to see a tussle in Congress. It's not going to happen. It's not going to be likely. First of all, the majority is with the Democrats anyway. There are no grounds already legally. Court after court after court, including the Supreme Court, have thrown out various challenges to the election process. The Justice Department, the Attorney General, William Barr, has said there is no evidence of any kind of fraud. There is no evidence of any kind of systemic fraud or organized fraud to subvert the election process. So in the wake of those findings, legally, the House of Representatives legislatively do not really have a standing. The only time a situation like that arises is if there's an undecided vote. It's an actual, tie, and you don't know. And I gave you the example of back in the 19th century when that happened once, and that's when the House of Representatives met. But at this stage, I don't see that working. It'll just be a lot of chaos for a while, maybe for a day or so.
Right.
But the Electoral College decision will stand.
Do you believe President Trump will concede, or do you think we should just give up on that?
He's not going to concede. I don't. And I said to you before, I don't think he really has to. It's a ceremony. It's something that has been accepted. It's been the tradition over the years, ever since independence, that when one wins, the other loses and concedes. In this case, but there's no such rule that you have to concede. You don't have to concede. So he can always say, no, I was the winner, but okay, let it be, and I'll see you after 4 years. I do not expect him to concede. He has proclaimed himself to never be a loser. He has proclaimed himself in his businesses and in political life to view losers with disdain. And so he's not about to view himself with disdain. And therefore, he's not going to admit that he's a loser. And I think in his mind, too, losing, there's a connotation of somebody who has failed miserably. And I don't think he likes that label for himself.
Yeah.
So he will not concede. And it doesn't matter if he doesn't concede. As of noon on the 20th of January, he will cease to be president of the United States.
Yes, definitely. Let's talk a little bit about the president-elect and what he's up to. There are certain seats that are being filled right now in his cabinet, and there are certain seats that are empty. Something that got my attention was Secretary of Education nominee Miguel Cardin. That news was just recently released. What is your comment on this person? And also, getting kids back into school is a huge agenda for the Biden-Harris administration coming in. Why is that such a huge issue to be on the agenda, and how will they ensure the safety?
Well, because without kids going to school, we're not going to have a future generation. They need their education. They're going to have to be. So I guess the Biden administration right now, with their team of medical advisors, especially on the COVID-19 crisis, including with Dr. Vivek Murthy of the Indian American community, the next Surgeon General, they'll be formulating a strategy of how to get kids to school safely. They have all determined already, both the Trump administration and the incoming Biden administration have already seen that virtual learning is not really working, especially for the younger set, the younger population. It is not helping with the development of kids. Kids need social interaction. They need to be with other kids. They need to be able to play, to do things like that. It's a very difficult situation for any government. And so they're going to have to come up with this plan. The new education secretary or the nominee will be a part and play a key role in that process. And I think they've chosen their cabinet members with a lot of diligence. They've done a lot of vetting from all these candidates, and I'm sure they've made sure that this person is capable of handling what amounts to a national crisis in every single department we're dealing with now. You're talking about a global crisis, first of all. And here in the United States now, every department within government itself is in crisis mode. So you're talking about a new leader that comes in, has to see who was there in the old leadership, purge them if necessary, to have a proper alignment of how to go forward. Education being critical. And as I said to you, think about it. We've had a whole year of kids not attending school. They've opened schools, closed them, opened them, shut them again. So kids have had a long period of instability, very dangerous for future generations. I don't see that stabilizing in 2021 either. It's going to take that herd immunity first to break through, and then finally the kids going back to a normal school pattern. Minimum of another year, in my view. So it's going to be very difficult. They're going to have to come up with a strategy. I'm not an educationist either, but as a journalist, having studied all these issues that you're asking me about, they're going to have to come up with a pattern where, say, 3 days in the week, a certain block of kids goes to school in person, then another 2 days in the week, another block. They might have to weave it over 7 days. So in other words, the Saturdays and Sundays will have to be worked in as well to accommodate, because many, many school districts are highly overpopulated. So how do you make something like this work without endangering them, without making sure they don't infect each other? And then again, you got the situation of parents who might be saying, I don't want to vaccinate my kids. And you got that situation to deal with. It's a really tough situation. So I think we're first going to have to worry about vaccines, herd immunity. Then those who resist and don't want to take it, fine, because at least the rate of infection is going to be brought down dramatically.
Yes, definitely. What do you think should be Miguel Cardin's first step if he was elected to his position in education?
In education,
Right.
He's going to have to figure out exactly what to do about the schools. Very first thing is what to do. You're going to have a new school year beginning. I mean, you'll have a new school term beginning in January. It'll have begun already, as a matter of fact. Now you've got kids getting restless. You got parents who have to work but cannot work because kids are at home, especially the young kids. They need attention. How do you get them to pay attention to their classrooms? It's a huge job. Actually, the education secretary's task is going to be immensely difficult. So it's a good question you've asked, because it's of enormous importance to the future of the entire country. This is going to be a new generation that has to be educated, has to be groomed, but they're now being raised in an environment of utmost danger to us as human beings, because we've never dealt with a situation like this where a virus is taking over our lives and has brought us all to our knees.
Right, definitely. Another thing that's on the agenda of the incoming administration is vaccine distribution and more locations for testing. Why do you think that focus needs to be there? And do you think there is a proper method of distribution right now with this administration?
There have been some hiccups, we hear, but right. the general in charge of that has already accepted responsibility. Saying that there were enough, but the distribution process, you have to understand that I don't blame them. You might try to be as perfect as you can, but the distribution process across an enormous country like the United States is a huge endeavor. And so to be able to get the vaccines that quickly out, that's why Joe Biden, when he got inoculated, the first thing he did was actually congratulate the Trump administration on Operation Warp Speed.
Right.
Saying it was a great job that they've done, that he was able to get this vaccine right now in December of 2020. None of us had thought this would happen. We thought it would be next year. But it happened because of Operation Warp Speed. And it was correct of the president-elect to congratulate the president and his team on this effort. Distribution is a huge challenge, always will be, always has been. That was the challenge for the ventilators that were needed earlier in the year when the pandemic struck and was taking this huge toll, especially in New York, on the East Coast, Eastern Seaboard here, and then on the West Coast in the state of Washington and then California, where the president had to call out these two naval vessels to come to the rescue and set up offshore hospitals to assist with the entire medical effort at that time. But the distribution at that time too was a problem, and it's because, just think about it, you have these huge ventilator machines, now you got to get them on trucks, you got to see if there are truck drivers available at that time, who were afraid to drive because of the the pandemic and the virus spreading so rapidly. Right now, the situation is, especially with the Pfizer vaccine, it needs to be stored at minus 70 plus degrees and then transported and then taken to spots where they're supposed to be, from there disseminated, and then they have to be thawed within a certain temperature, and then as soon as they're thawed, you have to administer that to all the patients before those, within hours, the vaccine is no good. It's mind-boggling. So you'll expect these hiccups. I think it's normal. I don't think it's anything to be critical of or to be afraid of. We expect them. So I did think there would be a shortage, even though they didn't say so. I suspected there would be a shortage, and it's a natural thing to have a shortage. The one thing I do fear is those who have tons of money, those who feel privileged, will try to cut the line. And that's going to be a problem, because they should go by the tier system, which is medically advised.
Definitely. I just have a couple of questions left for you. Just going off of this vaccine distribution, do you think minority communities are again going to be affected more as compared to other communities in this country? Do we see the impact of racial disparity even in the vaccine distribution? Yes,
100%. And actually, the statistics already show that it's a number of the minorities who are the worst sufferers, the ones who are getting infected the most. Why? Because they live in the most densest of areas of the country. They're living in clusters together. So if one person gets it, a whole group is going to get it. And then if just as the South Asian community, the Indian community, we're very, we're very community people. We're very social people. All right. So you tend to just congregate together in large families and things like that. That's where the spread is most. So it's with the African American community. It's with the Latino community. It's with the Asian community, specifically within the Indian American community, within the South Asian American community. So yes, the answer to your question is minorities will face a lot of tough times getting it unless they're privileged. They will face it. So I think the effort here has been from the Trump administration. And President-elect Biden has already made it clear, and he wants to make it the distribution very equitable, so that everybody who needs it first will get it first, and then it'll go by this tier system set up by the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, which has been outlining who should get it next, who shouldn't get it, who should get it after the next person, etc., etc., etc. But yes, the minorities will face an uphill task, I think, because the nature of society, the nature and what we've all been through, this divisiveness we've faced.
Right.
So there will be those who feel privileged who say, hey, I'm going to get ahead of the line and do it. So unless we have people who are there to strictly say, no, you're not getting ahead of that person deserves it first, we're going to see some of those hiccups as well.
Yeah, surely the new administration incoming is going to have a lot of work to do.
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot of
Very
fixing
tough
to
time.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I just have two questions left for you. The first one is the nomination or the seat that was given, Senator Kamala Harris's seat has been given to Alex Padilla, and he was the Secretary of State for California. Your comments?
Very good. It's a good appointment. I mean, they have a Latino for the first time.
Right.
Who will be, being sent out there and who will be the Secretary of, I think it's a great position. I think it's a great, who will be a senator. And I think it's a great thing for the state of California. I living in New Jersey, you living in New York. We've seen a lot of the minorities now representing, our states in Congress and in the Senate, etc. But this is a big one for California, which I think it was long overdue for a state like California, which has a huge Hispanic population, especially in the southern part of the state. So I think it's a great decision. There are some misgivings. There are some who've been saying there should have been another African American who should have taken her seat, should have been somebody else. But I think it's a very good choice. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, has made a superb decision, has taken a superb decision. And I think California now gets its first Latino senator. Very good.
Yeah. Very nice. We love hearing stories of diversity and inclusivity, especially here. My last question to you is about the Georgia runoff. I would like your insight into how you're looking at the race right now. We had Vice President-elect Harris go and campaign for the two Democratic candidates. How are you looking at this race? And about 1.6 million votes have already been cast. So it seems like Georgians really want to make some change.
Either that or status quo. And that's the point. This election is so critical that both parties are, pulling out all the stops to see who gets these two seats. For the Democrats, they've got to get both the seats, and they still will need the tiebreaker in a Senate vote from, by then, Vice President Kamala Harris to get anything done legislatively in the Senate. So it's an extremely crucial race. It's an extremely crucial race for the Democrats. It's an extremely critical one for the Republicans as well. They don't think they can afford to lose this. They need to win as well. And it's going to be very exciting. It's going to be down to the wire. I think this is going to end up being even more important than the presidential race or the race for the White House because of the enormous responsibility that will lie on the shoulders of the U.S. Senate. Congress already has trimmed its Democratic majority down to just a slim margin now. So for the Democrats, it's critically important that they get these two Senate seats. If they lose even one, it's not going to be good for the Democrats. For the Republicans, the same thing, same situation, but actually a little less so because the Republicans can still have the upper hand and be on top of the situation as far as, in other words, they can bargain with the president. If he wants his nominees in there and confirmed, they can make life difficult for him, which I fully expect that they're going to do. So these Georgia, the runoff races, the Senate runoff races, the two of them in Georgia are absolutely important. I have a feeling the entire country is going to be riveted watching those two races because they're going to be much more important than the presidential race.
Definitely. Just one follow-up question to that. Millions of dollars have been invested into these two campaigns for this runoff. We are in COVID-19 crisis where there's issues of food insecurity and unemployment. Does that make sense to a normal person?
No, it doesn't. But then there are such things as political action committees, PACs and super PACs. They are the ones that raise this money, and they are the ones that decide where they pour the money and what are the stakes. The stakes are much larger at the national level. That means in Washington, D.C. So there are much bigger powers that be behind these type of campaigns. And that's why you're seeing a lot of money pouring in, because everybody sees the stakes is very, very, very high. Right. So PACs and super PACs are the ones who bring in the funding. Simple as that. The average person out there can only do so much. contributing, say, $5 or $10 or $250, or even individually $2,500 or $2,700, whatever the limit is, the federal limit for contributions to campaigns. But the super PACs and PACs have an unlimited flow of money. And if they as a group decide that this race is important for this particular reason, they're going to pour it in. And for these two races, we're seeing an unprecedented amount of money going in there.